Hi, hello, welcome, Sweeps here. Today we're going to do something a little different, and we're going to go through a few shorter stories about D&D horror. So without further ado, let's begin. And as usual, be sure to give thumbs up to all the stories we read today. Links in description.
Story 1. That time a new player got upset over my character's trait because it ruined his ideas.
This comes from a D&D 5e game that I was in a few years back, and it requires some important context for you to fully understand the title and what led it to happening, so let me provide it. Additionally, some details have been lost to time, so some info is missing and replaced with my best guess. Without further ado, I was playing a tiefling monk by the name of Feroci. Feroci had several character traits that were notable, but the most important of them all was that he was a man of very few words. So few words that over the span of the first arc, a full 16 sessions essentially, he only ever spoke maybe 3 or 4 times. His words when he did speak were always polite, softly spoken, and respectful of the person addressed. There are a few other PCs in the group, so let me give a quick rundown. We had Du, the Water Genasi sorcerer, played by who we will call Tess. There was also Volcanomin, the Kenku rogue, played by who we will call Henry. There was Thelenia, an elf warlock, played by those who we will call Bob. And finally, Act 2, the subject of this story, Jorn, a dwarven paladin, played by who we will call Jack.
The memes.
Jack was a later addition because he was a friend of the DM, who we will call Jeremy, but couldn't join during Act 1 because of personal and work matters. From the very beginning of Act 2, Jack seemed determined upon learning my character rarely spoke to make him open up more. Although consulting me or the DM, he'd grow frustrated when my character simply didn't verbally respond to any of his dialogues or attempts at conversation. I explained to Jack out of character that Feroci was the embodiment of the quiet one trope, and thus only spoke when he deemed it absolutely necessary. That way his words held more weight. Jack, unfortunately, saw this less as me trying to talk him out of his goal and more as a challenge to accomplish it. I don't remember every instance of his character trying to start a conversation with mine, but I do remember it having a pattern that went something like this. Someday, huh? Still nothing to say, eh, Hornhead? I later learned that Jack was complaining to Jeremy and other PCs about my character not engaging with the group or story, when in truth my character drove part of the narrative in Act 1. The whole of Act 1 was centered around his home and having a mysterious plague that needed to be cured, and while he didn't talk, his actions clearly displayed that he cared. He helped secure food and medicine for the infected, searched the ruined sewers under the city for the rumored source of the plague, fought cultists who were protecting said source from destroying it. And in Act 2, Thelenia and Du had some spotlight while Feroci spent time on the side dealing with the side effects / fallout of his choices in the prior act, but he still dedicated time to helping the party whenever he needed it. When he was told about this fact, he seemed to have backed off, but as we soon learn, he was bottling up his frustration and getting ready to blow. You may be wondering, what caused the explosion? It was my character speaking, but it wasn't to the paladin. It was to the sorcerer and warlock who both need a few comforting words after an intense scene. My character only said 4 words, but these 4 words, "You both did well," made Jack explode at the table and start cussing me out practically without warning.
I think it's time for Jack to let her rip.
I can't remember exactly what he said verbatim, but the general gist was I had it out for him because he wasn't playing a girl and that I ignored him to talk all the time for no reason. He wanted everyone to like my character until I ruined everything. So on and so forth. Jack stormed out, leaving the table stunned and a little afraid, and he never returned. Told Jeremy that he wouldn't join any game I was in because I was Catholophobic? What? And unable to play the game right.
Is this some kind of twisted joke?
The campaign continued and we got another much more chill player to replace Jack. But even today, we remember the time that Jack stormed off because a character trait didn't match up with what he wanted.
Don't fuck with this, Senator.
Well, this is an interesting story to say the least. I can understand to a degree how it can be annoying to try to interact with a mute character, but as OP states, he made it clear to Jack that his character wasn't a talkative type. But here's the thing, there's a difference between a silent character and a silent player. So long as the player is explaining what the character is doing, then it shouldn't be a problem. And so long as the character in and of itself isn't holding the party back, there shouldn't be an issue either. Even if it is an issue, it's not the end of the world. The reaction that Jack had was totally uncalled for, especially with throwing Catholiphobia out there. I didn't even know that was a word. I find it amazing, though, that Jack didn't even try to talk to OP about this. He went to everyone else, but didn't try to open communications with the one person that was actually important to this. Next story!
Store 2. DM's girlfriend on a whole other level, coming from my mind.
The DM is a nice guy that tries hard to please everyone, but his girlfriend actively wastes our time. The couple have been gaming for a while now, board games, TTRPG, online video games, etc. It's never been a game-breaking issue when she loses focus or doesn't take the game seriously, but now that the boyfriend is the DM, we've lost all control. To start, the rules don't seem to apply to her anymore. Her level 1 wizard with 0 con has 18 HP? Spell slots? Who heard of them? Must be infinite! And she re-rolls until someone notices, then adds a random inflated modifier out of nowhere. Wow! This is somewhat understandable because her character sheet is entirely empty except for her name. She has zero clue what her character's abilities are, what she's carrying, what her spells do. Absolutely oblivious. Every single turn she just rolls a d20 without saying what she's doing and looks to the DM boyfriend to tell her what she actually did. Now, aside from slowing down the game tremendously, trying to recall the modifiers and damage rolls every time, there's actually no excuse since it's not her first rodeo. She's played many times before, rolled her own character the same time as the rest of us, and has ample time to fill in the blanks. It's like she can't even be bothered. This we can at least deal with, filling in the blanks with something reasonable on the fly that doesn't have to detract from the fun. But what does detract from it is that she's playing an evil character. Oh boy, laziness plus evil, that's always a good combination. Despite having a negative charisma modifier, she attempts to intimidate and threaten everyone, even other PCs. She tests for traps with the NPCs we're protecting, and extorts even the lowliest of peasants. She plays like she's already level 20 and is honestly surprised when she fails a DC, which is rare. It's obnoxious to have metagame our characters to find reasons to be in a party with her PC. All that is par for the course though. We've all had to deal with obnoxious players once in a while, right? Oh hell yeah. At least we are there to play the game, right?
Wrong!
She spends a minority of the time actually at the table. If it's not her turn, she gets up and leaves to go to the bathroom, make food, start small talk with other players, answer the phone. Not kidding. She regularly delays the game with tangents, leaving us twiddling our thumbs waiting for her, then is surprised she missed something and that we had to wait for her. It's honestly unbearable. You might be thinking that we brought this on ourselves for not saying anything. Not the case. Her own friends have called her out at the table. They say it's rude. They say it's disrespectful to her guests, and have pleaded with her to focus. Mind you, this is not an attention deficit. She's perfectly capable. She would rather just be doing anything else, preferably with alcohol. DM has privately apologized for his girlfriend's behavior, but hasn't done anything about it. We just have to live with it, like he does, and we can't play without her because of how much she enjoys playing. Needless to say, we won't be playing anymore. P.S. Everyone is still friends, for now, but girlfriend is entirely aware that she is the sole reason we don't play D&D anymore. Her response? Well, it wasn't a good campaign anyway. Ow! Not much to say here, but it's a bit of a stigma where you shouldn't play with your significant others, and this kind of fills that stereotype. I understand wanting to do things with your significant other, and I myself have my own experience with this sort of thing. Hell, my girlfriend, I love her, and if she's listening to this, I had to choose my words carefully, but she wants to burst in on everything I do, and I don't want to exclude her, but if you're going to be part of the game, you need to be part of the game and not just do this stuff. I don't really approve of this DM's actions, but any guy who's got a girlfriend will tell you that it's hard to say no to her, especially when it's to spend time with her. So it's a hard situation. Granted, I don't think the girlfriend's last comment was really nice, especially since she clearly didn't understand the amount of work and passion a DM goes through. What next? Gonna throw out his old superhero comics and Yu-Gi-Oh cards? Anyway, next video. This time talking about another silent character, shall we?
Store 3. Player needs to center of attention, but can't talk to anyone.
There is a player in our group that loves to roleplay, but only if it involves her. No one else seems to be able to have their own moments. Anytime we meet new NPCs or get near a town, she feels the need to be the first to interact with them, but never does it well. She also doesn't care about anyone else. If it's not about her, she'll play with her pets, or play with the minis like dolls or be on her phone. She never pays attention during combat. I'm getting deja vu already. See, she made an animal, as in she made a character who doesn't talk, can't read or write, and doesn't understand how to interact with people or civilizations. Another of our group's characters has to babysit her constantly so she doesn't do anything too horrible. She hoards magic items because shiny. Anytime we get close to a town, she decides to transform into some predatory animal and run through it to cause as much panic as possible, or meeting an NPC, she'll throw rocks at them. What kind of animal is she playing, a gorilla? In a dozen sessions, I haven't wanted to interact with her once. The only person in our party who interacts with her is the person who has to babysit her. No one else really cares about her, and she doesn't belong in our party. Even in her own character, she doesn't actually have a justification for staying with us beyond just following us around. She doesn't know anything about any of their characters in the party, and she doesn't bother to pay attention to us. And the sad thing is, she's safe from any danger because the dungeon master is her boyfriend. So he gives her plot armor. No matter how bad she acts, there's never consequences. She should be in jail by now, but everyone just seems to ignore her antics because if she doesn't get her way, she just becomes really whiny and cold towards everyone else. And it's not like we can drop her or the game because several of us live together and that would spark a tantrum to end all tantrums. It's gotten so bad that I've plotted her death dozens of times. Oof. No enemy will attack her, and no NPC will get rid of her, so one of us would have to do it. But God, would that release a demon! I'm sorry, this turned more into an event than I intended, just a symptom of a bad player and a bad DM holding the rest of us hostage with no easy way out. I'll try the rest for now. That is a hard situation. It's very tough, but frankly, I think it's important to realize if a game is just too tiring or if there's a player and a DM that's just not working out, you need to talk to the rest of the party to see if they all agree with you, especially the ones that live with you. And while it may be awkward, a game like this is like a rotten tooth. Sometimes you just gotta yank it out because the pain it's causing you right now is not worth the large amount of pain you'll have to deal with once you do so. Trust me, if you don't take care of it now, you're going to regret it. Besides, it might serve as a wake-up call to the bad DM and the bad player. On to our final story of the video.
Store 4. Not allowing an immortal familiar is apparently complete nerfing his character.
This is a shorter story about a player I had in a campaign I run. I will name him Yardem. And this is one of the many stories I have about this guy. The crux of the issue is that Yardem kept trying to interject overpowered homebrew into the campaign and would get upset when I would tell him that he couldn't do it. He had this familiar robot spider that he also used as his spiritual weapon. I have no inherent issue with this, and for the most part there were no issues, until a certain combat encounter presented itself when he was doing a lot of damage with his familiar. Yardem had initially summoned the spider as a spiritual weapon, but then started casting spells through it. The spider was just ripping through into enemies, rolling consistently high damage with Yardem casting spells through it as a familiar. As a result of this, I rolled that one of the enemies got really annoyed and aimed at the spider. Yardem told me that I couldn't target the spider because it was a spiritual weapon. I explained to Yardem that sure, he had initially summoned the spider as a spiritual weapon, but I pointed out that he had been using it mostly as a familiar as he was casting spells through it. That meant that it was currently a familiar and could be targeted. I then explained that if you're using your familiar spiritual weapon and you use it to cast spells, in that round it's currently a familiar and can be targeted. This would not end its function as a spiritual weapon, but it wouldn't be able to function as a familiar until you go through the standard processes of resummoning it.
Everybody got that?
Yardem apparently wasn't okay with this and accused me of going out of my way to completely nerf his character. I responded telling him that I'm not nerfing his character. I'm not just going to allow a player to have an immortal invulnerable familiar that they can have give the help action and cast spells through it because it's overpowered. He pouted for the rest of the session and afterwards made some really passive-aggressive comments about how I'm controlling him. I just rolled my eyes at him and this was the beginning of the end for him. He eventually rage quit out of the campaign mid-combat because he failed a concentration check on a spell. TLDR, player pouts and accuses me of completely nerfing his character because I won't let him have an immortal invulnerable familiar.
You took my only food! Now I'm gonna starve!
Now, this isn't the worst story that we've read today, but this is something that should have been hashed out before this mechanic was even used. The DM is god of your world, and you can't just make up new rules on the fly without the DM's consent. And if the DM has an issue with how you're playing your character, or if there's something he thinks is broken, then you need to talk to him in a more calming manner. Don't try to say you are being limited, it's the DM's call. Again, this is a situation where communication is key and could have solved this issue before, actual rage quitting. In any case, I hope you all enjoyed these tales of RPG horror. Be sure to go to the original posts and upvote the original threads. Without these redditors, we would not be able to have these tales to tell. So giving them some karma is the least we can do for these guys. Until the next time, I'm Sweeps, and have a lovely day.